So your data really tells you something. Because basically, if it's not significant, it doesn't mean there is no difference. If it is significant, sometimes that doesn't mean that there is no difference. Be careful with these statistical interpretations. Limitations of the study. Consider those and try to be honest about it. Was your design good enough? Did it really, in the end, did you get the data that you needed, or did you notice, maybe I should have done this differently? If yes, suggest improvements and changes. Because maybe that's the reason you didn't find the significance. The sample was too small. The measurement method was not sensitive enough. Things like that, which you might find out in the end. So always consider the following questions. Your results, your measured results, can they be false or inadequate? Why can they be false? That would be maybe, it says contamination, lower statistical power because of a small sample number, things like that. Is it possible? You don't have to expound on that endlessly, but if some things are comparatively obvious, you should address it, because if you don't and you publish it, somebody else will. It's always better to do it prior to that already. Also, experimental studies depends on the study type, but sometimes they can help you to elucidate a mechanism of something or develop a theory explaining something. That is also part of the discussion then. That's usually not the case for reviews. That's pretty specific for experimental studies. Now, we had the opening. We have looked in detail at what the results tell us. Did they answer the questions? How do they fit into the context of what others measured? Next point to consider, well, now I have these findings, these answers. What are the consequences for the further studies, for treatment? Can I make recommendations? Anything. What can be deduced from my answers to the questions that will help in any way the general public? So what you should do at the beginning of this paragraph or chapter, first, what are the principal consequences of your findings? Shortly mention them, put them into relevance for clinical applications and further studies. You can do both, for both. Usually, if you do experimental studies, you will definitely mention something with further studies. If it's a review, it's probably more directly for the clinical application. These things depend. Yes, these rules are not set in stone, but they're a good hint. If you think, I know this is wrong for what I'm writing, then possibly it might be necessary to change it, but start like this. Consequences mean, you said that, yeah, how can I generalize what I found or what I measured? How can I make a general deduction from it, which will result in recommendations maybe, and thus in the clinical implications, methodological implications, that's for experimental thesis, new things to consider as a result of the findings can happen for both the review or for the experimental thesis. Those are the points that should be addressed in this part. Limitations, like I said, all studies, excuse me, just a moment. All studies have limitations. Identify and acknowledge them before somebody else does it. In a review, if you remember back to the first lecture or something like that, there are very many different types of bias for the studies, for the reviews. Consider those. Consider which might apply for you, and then address the issue. In the study, you also have, it's a bit more concrete, the study design sample size. I already said that if the sample size is too small, maybe it's not statistically significant because of that. Quality of the equipment, all of these things. In the review, it might be study quality, it might be paper selection. Think about it. Identify, acknowledge. sometimes told this to students, and then I got a discussion where you thought, oh my God, we will never be able to publish this paper. They are basically saying it is very, very bad, which it is not. So, though you should address these issues, be self-critical about it, you should also, don't beat yourself up about it. Every study has limitations. That's normal. So be realistic about it. It might not be the 100 total validity study that everybody is going to refer to for the next 20 years, but it will still have merit. Just you have to balance things a little bit. These I mentioned already. So be self-critical, but don't trash your own study. That's a fine line to walk sometimes. Last part, the conclusions. Basically, the conclusions are what your reader should remember. If he remembers anything about your paper, that's it. That usually conclusions are short, one paragraph, not a very long one. Don't recapitulate the complete discussion in there. Very short. The take-home message, what your reader should remember, usually is at the very beginning of the conclusion. And sometimes it can be at the end too, if you feel that it's just more logical in the flow, you can do that. Very often it's right at the beginning, just hit them with it. And then it could also include very shortly the summarization of the most important implications of what you found. Basically, a few details to the take-home message, like maybe 2 sentences or 3 at the most. Be very careful about this one. Avoid. Sometimes the conclusions make very sweeping statements, and it was shown that this method can work for everybody in the future. Only say what is really supported by your data and what you found. Do not generalize. You do generalize, but careful about it. Do not generalize too much, because that will simply sound unbelievable. If they say, well, no, what were they thinking when they said that? Then maybe your readers start, okay, and what were they thinking when they said all of the other things? So avoid statements or conclusions not supported by your data in any way. Some more points, just again mentioning them. Basically, the discussion, it comments your results and does not repeat them. You reference back to them. You give very short summarized versions, sometimes a little bit more detail if that is needed at this point to clarify, but in general you do not repeat in detail your results section. I mean, why? You have it up there already. Side issues can be very interesting, but they'll just lead your readers away from what you actually want to say. Usually you want to say something, you have a point. And if you address lots of side issues, your point is going to be lost in there. And that's not what you want to achieve. Think about this. Usually your study has some new aspects, something new. Whatever you think is a new or interesting or important point, emphasize those in the discussion. And the conclusions. Said this before already, don't repeat detail of data, of materials and methods, of background, anything that was given before. You can shortly reference to it again, but not in detail. Some things to avoid. That's in many cases for experimental thesis, goes for reviews also to a large degree. Do not overinterpret. If you have only 3 points of measurement, you cannot say, you cannot extrapolate to the next 500 points of measurements. If you have your results only for a group of 5 people, you also will have limited reason to extrapolate to the population as a whole. Yeah, don't overinterpret. This goes together with it. No unwarranted speculation. That's a very close relative of overinterpreting. If you must speculate what those results might mean in the future, perhaps, make it very clear that you are speculating. And do it very seldomly. Once might be okay if it's a novel approach for something. If it happens 3 times, you get the impression that this person is very, very convinced of their own research and apparently so convinced that no results are needed to support it. Doesn't make a good impression. That also goes with this one. If we all have our bias, if we do a specific research and we measure things, we usually go in there with an expectation of what we will find. Or we have a new material and we want this to be good. Those are biases. And be careful in the discussion. Don't let your bias rule you. Be objective. Really look at your data. Really look at what it tells you. Does it tell you what you wanted to say? Really? Or is that just a tiny little difference and you are over-interpreting again? Same thing here. Inflating the importance of the findings. Yes, be objective and realistic in your evaluations. No side issues. No conclusions that are not supported by data. Keep the questions and the results in mind. Also, one that's pretty rare, actually, at least that I have seen it, criticizing other studies or investigators. I mean, sure, you compare. And if you don't agree with them, you try to give reasons for that. But always be professional about it. Don't really aggressively criticize anybody in the papers. That's just not really done, even if what they did was crap. Say it in a polite and professional way. So now 2 examples. Hopefully it makes it a little bit more understandable. This is from, I think I used this example already. This is from a review which we wrote and published. They actually printed that. So, and we do start like this, like I just told you. Restate aim. You can see it, 3 sentences. What was the main aim of this study? Very shortly. What did I want to find out? Main point. Summarize most important findings. And that's, in this case, you can give some numbers. We just don't say it's more or less, but be limited with those. Use them only for clarification. Otherwise, make it readable. Your reader doesn't want to struggle to lots and lots and lots of different numbers. If it's just a few, like 15% compared to 10, compared to 7, that's still like accessible if you read the text. So very shortly, give the main point you did measure. Not all of the side issues. That's just the effect of the surface and not effect of location in addition, effect of animal model in addition. Those are for later. Main, most important findings. That's paragraph 2. And you can see that is the opening, and that's a complete one. I didn't delete anything from that. Then, of course, here I deleted a lot because that's the main part of the discussion. You go through your findings one by one, either according to the questions, research questions you asked, or to the key findings which you have. In that case, it was depending on coating type, what happened for the individual coating types, so you ran through those. And then you had some other effects of animal model, effect of location, side issues which are related to your main question. And here you also looked at that in detail. For all the different coating types, was there an additional effect of location? Yes, you get this from the same experimental setup. Talk about those in detail. Put it into the literature context. What did others find? Does it agree with you? Does it not? Then the consequences of your findings. Now this was an animal study, so the clinical consequences are usually not that much. If it's a clinical research paper, that section is usually a bit larger. But also you can see here how to act a consequence. Based on the results I have here, which I just discussed in the section above with interpretation, there is no if major effect of location on bone implant contact. That's a consequence. So, and here you can also, that's also starting to address limitations. So you see things are mixed up often a little bit. So it's a tentative conclusion because only 2 types of coatings could be compared and not the others because there was no significant differences, things like that. And here, if this translates to humans, will have to be answered in prospective clinical studies. That's again a little bit the limitations, a little bit how this will continue. Sometimes that's mixed up. Then very concretely the limitations of the study. In this case, maybe it would be we only used healthy animals, and most implants actually go into humans, which are often have a compromised bone growth. So that we cannot really translate those results, although that might be clinically more significant. That's a problem of the study setup. There are no studies with compromised animals, so we had to take this, despite the fact that it is not as relevant to the more interesting question. Address the limitations. Conclusions, and these are again the complete conclusions. Conclusions are short and to the point. If you have half a page, it's probably too much. I mean, this is for studies that's also short and to the point, but the reviews we want you to write are also they're not 60-page or 100-page things which would merit large conclusions. They usually address only one point. So again, in the first sentence, take-home message. Take-home message, no significant effect of biological coatings on bone growth in large animals. Well, it might not have been what we wanted to find, but it's what we found. Stated. And then you can add 2 or more sentences that explain this a little bit more, add some more information to it. Outlook, whether it translates, and this took only specific studies into account. Short and to the point. Now, second example, and you remember, we had in the last lecture. Remember this example about the NOAC, and the problem with giving an example, usually trying to evaluate the quality of a discussion. What do I need to know? You cannot look at the quality of a discussion if you see only the discussion to a certain degree. But the main point is, does it address the research questions? Does it use all the data that was generated? And for that, you have to know what are the research questions, which data is there in the results, things like that. So I used the example from the last time where you had the aim and the questions, having to use both here. You see the reason for that soon. So let's run through this schematics. First, start with the opening. The aim should be in there, the major findings. I did upload this paper for you. I hope you printed it out, because this is going to be very difficult to read. But these are the first 3 paragraphs. Anticoagulation therapy is most widely used. They can be given in fixed dosages. No, that's still not. No.